In fact, if you look at the lives of the great creative men and women, like Goethe, began the composition of the second part of Faust when he was 85. Grandma Moses started painting at the age of 75 and was still painting at the age of 100. Albert Schweitzer, whom I worked with in Africa, was still working a full day at the age of 91, when most of the people, if not all the people he had grown up with, had been in their graves for decades. So, if for no other reason than the fact that you want to live forever, is you must become an active, intelligent learner. You must develop the capacity to learn. You must learn how to learn. Now, a few years ago, back in the 50s in Bulgaria, a man named Georgy Lazanov began some experiments that have had a tremendous, Lazanov have had a tremendous influence on our thinking in the Western world in the last couple of decades. A tremendous book has been written on his work called Super Learning, talking about the results of his experiments. And Lazanov began studying the fact that information was exploding at such a rate that nobody could keep current on their field anymore. That no matter what field you were in, tens, hundreds, even thousands of articles were being written every year, that nobody could absorb the information. So he became preoccupied with the need to create a way for people to learn more rapidly. He called his system accelerated learning. We call it rapid learning. Some people call it super learning. It means the same thing. It means how can you take in more information at a faster rate? And what Lazanov found was this. He began as a pioneer of whole brain research. He found that there are really two hemispheres of the brain, and the two hemispheres of the brain perform different functions, and that people who learn the very best are capable of harmonizing and using both hemispheres of the brain. If the left hemisphere is responsible for certain functions, the right is responsible for certain functions. He also found that there's a massive tissue that divides the brains called the corpus callosum, and that children up to the age of 5 or 6 learn at about 25 times the adult rate. And his thoughts were, would it be possible to recreate the conditions that exist in early childhood that enable children to learn at a fantastic rate of speed in adult life? And so he found that in looking at the functions of the brains, he found that the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere were responsible for very different ways of thinking. Let me give you some examples. For instance, the left hemisphere is verbal. It thinks in terms of words. The right hemisphere is pictorial or artistic. It thinks in terms of pictures. The left hemisphere is analytical, whereas the right hemisphere is holistic. It sees all the facts and information. It sees the big picture, if you like. The left hemisphere is pragmatic. It's very matter-of-factual. The right hemisphere is intuitive and is the seat of intuition and feelings. The left hemisphere is concrete. It likes to see things that it can count, touch, taste, and feel. The left hemisphere, the right hemisphere is abstract. It's responsible for abstract concepts, scientific concepts, artistic or philosophic concepts. The left hemisphere is linear, in that it sees things in an orderly row, and it is also sequential, and likes to take things one thing at a time. The right hemisphere, on the other hand, is musical and artistic, if you like, and spontaneous, and is responsible for humor. The left hemisphere is responsible for language, the stringing together of words in a logical order to make sentences. It's also responsible for math. The right hemisphere is responsible for dance and for poetry. And these two hemispheres, in order to work properly, have to be harmonized. But they have very, very different functions. And as Lazanov did his research, he found another thing, is that when he studied the way that people learned, he found that people learned at different levels of brainwave activities and as a result of different things. For instance, he found that the brain functions at 4 different levels. And the first level is what is called the beta level. The beta level is 14 waves per second or above. The beta level is normal waking. This is where you and I are. Whenever our mind is very active, very intense, our brainwave activity, or what is called cycles, our brainwave activity is very frantic. This is where most of us spend most of our time. It's also the time where we learn the least efficiently. He said he found that below beta was the alpha level. The alpha level was 8 to 13 waves or cycles per second. And this was a more if you like, modulated wave level, and he found that we have a tendency to learn in this stage. This is the deep relaxation stage. This is the stage that we're in when we're sitting deeply relaxed, when we're daydreaming, if you like, or prior to going to sleep, we drop into this level. Just below the alpha level is what is called the theta level. The theta level is 5 to 7 waves per second. The theta level has, again, bigger waves, and this theta level is where we just are starting to drop into dreaming. It's called the hallucinatory or illusionary area, where we're starting to have dreams just before we fall asleep. Have you ever had the experience of being woken up just as you're falling asleep and being jerked out suddenly from this theta level? You weren't into delta, you weren't sound asleep, and you notice how jarring it is. But what Lozano found was the alpha theta level. This level in here is where we do our best learning. And that when we are learning at this level, our ability to learn is dramatically increased. And just below theta is delta, and delta is 1/2 to 4 waves per second. And these are long waves, if you like. Now, of course, below 1/2 a wave per second, you are no longer working. As a matter of fact, the cessation of brainwave activity on an electroencephalogram is one of the clinical definitions of death. Now, what Lozano tried to do was he said, would it be possible to bring people down from beta, where they're awake, into this alpha theta level and somehow activate the right and the left brains so that they work simultaneously? And he came up with a method using music and relaxation. And he began his experiments back in 1965-66 in Bulgaria. One of the most interesting experiments, he started off with language. And the language he chose was the language of French. Now, if you were to take a French course at your local university as an adult, you would be expected in a 3-hour period, and 3 hours seems to be the ideal study period for a language, you'd be expected in 3 hours to learn approximately 25 to 40 words. And you'd be expected to have a retention level up until the final exam with due study and so on of about 80% and maybe less. As a matter of fact, what Lozano found, he said that most of the ways that we learn in our society are so inefficient as to be deplorable, in that the average person who gets a university degree in our society after 4 years and $25,000 to $50,000 of expenses forgets 80 to 90% of everything they learned at the university before the summer after the university, the final year, is over. As a matter of fact, as much as 80% is lost in the first 30 days. It was been postulated by a couple of university professors, if you want to clear out most of the universities in the country, very simple way to do it, is call everybody back 48 hours after final exams to rewrite without notice. And you would find that the traditional way of learning, which is to cram the brain with as much information as possible and to rush into the exam room and regurgitate the information onto the exam and then go back and recover and do it over again, this way of learning is so inefficient that almost all the information we take in that way is lost completely. That's why if you took a language course in school and then you ever went to one of the countries where they spoke the language, you found that you probably couldn't remember more than 3 or 4 words and even those you had wrong. Well, so Lozano decided to use music and relaxation, and this is what he did. Under very closely controlled conditions, he brought in 60 students. These 60 students were drawn from a variety of occupations. None of them had any knowledge of French at all. They were very closely monitored and screened by people who were not favorable toward this experiment. So it was very rigorously controlled. In 1966, he brought in these 60 people, and he felt that he would have to greatly increase the average level of learning in order to get approval for the establishment of his Institute of Suggestology. The Institute of Suggestology and Suggestopedia was subsequently set up in Sofia, Bulgaria. What he did is he took these people, and we had 60 people, and his goal was to get them to 150 words per session, 100 to 150 words per session with higher levels of retention. What they did is they brought them in, they played gentle, relaxing music, they turned down the lights, and they read them the words on cards with the French on one side, the Bulgarian on the other. And as they read them the words, the students repeated the words in a deeply relaxed state, and they brought them up to a state of full awareness and reviewed the words and then tested them on it.